Hey y'all, it's me, Jen. Before we get started with today's episode, I've got a quick question for you. When we make these stories, we always have you in mind. I often wonder who you are, our listener, in your house or on the bus or on a walk, tuned in to our podcast. And that's what we've been formally calling you on the show, our listeners. But informally, behind the scenes, we've been coming up with potential nicknames for y'all. We are the evergreen after all. Sometimes we call you saplings, sometimes greenies. But we've been wondering, what do you want to be called? Maybe there's something better we haven't even dreamt up yet. If you have any ideas, just let us know. You can send them to theevergreen@opb.org. For now, enjoy the show. In the summer of 2023, 3 sisters and their daughters set out on a horse-packing trip through northeastern Oregon's Wallowa Mountains. This trip has been a long time coming.
We've been waiting for this for several months, and for me, for years, so I'm very excited.
For Sharon Mesha and her sisters Melissa Over and Sally Deichler, this land holds lifelong memories. They know traversing this ancient terrain will have its challenges. For example, in true Oregon fashion, it has already begun to rain.
The weather was concerning, and then there's a part of me that says, it is what it is, I'm gonna get wet, and indeed, that is exactly what happened.
But a little rain can't stop them. They're powered by family, each other, and the women who came before them, who rode this range together many years before.
I mean, this isn't new, having thunderstorms in the summer.
They just hung tarps up between trees, and no tents. It was part of the experience. The dogs settled in between them, and I had this image of them staying dry in wet weather.
In the early 20th century, the sisters' grandmother, Jean Birnie, led a trailblazing group of Oregon horsewomen through the Wallowas on this same route. For 30 years, the women banded together to take on these rugged mountains.
One of the women wrote about encountering a very steep trail and questioning whether or not the horses can do it. And our grandmother, Jean, just says, "Buckle up, girls. You're going to do this."
They called themselves the Hen Party. I'm Jen Chavez, and this is The Evergreen, a podcast from OPB about the place you call home. Today, the horsewomen of the Hen Party, and how in this Oregon wilderness, they found friendship, empowerment, solace, each other, and themselves. And how almost a century later, their descendants continue their family story by retracing their steps on a horse-packing expedition of their own. OPB Oregon Field Guide producer Jewel Gilfillan went along to document their journey, and she's joining us today to share the family history of the Hen Party and consider its legacy today. Jewel, welcome back to The Evergreen. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So the original Hen Party trips started around the 1930s, and they were led by Jean Birnie. Her granddaughters, Melissa, Sharon, and Sally, describe her this way.
Jean, from a young age, really understood the importance of being in nature and having a relationship with nature and trees and mountains.
She lived simply. She always had dogs. She always had to have a horse, or 2 or 3. I love that she knew all the wildflowers. She could name them all.
We spent an awful lot of time with her up in a cabin outside of La Grande that didn't have any electricity whatsoever or running water. We rode horses without reins or saddles. We had ticks in our underarms, dirt on our feet when we go to bed at night, but incredibly tired out and happy. And she was always there as a presence.
Jewel, can you kind of help us visualize the land the Hen Party traveled in the Eagle Cap Wilderness?
Yeah, it is rugged. It's very mountainous, and it's not like the Cascades, a single mountain. It's an uplifted range, so it's a kind of a tangle of mountains that have been pressed over eons against each other. It's jagged, it's got granite and marble, and it's beautiful and majestic, but it's also rough.
Gerda Brownton took 5 trips with the Hen Party, and she talked about it for a 2004 oral history project. She joined the Hen Party in 1940, but first she had to prove to them that she had what it takes.
Jean and those people who had been going for years pretty much were the jury. And so if you could ride a horse up the steep hill and down the steep hill, if you passed that test and they liked you, why then you could go.
So it was hard, right? What did these trips actually entail for the original Hen Party?
Yeah, they were tough. And, my understanding is they planned for them a full year ahead of time. And they had everything down to a science. They had different measurements of grain. They had to bring food for the horses. They didn't have tents. They didn't have sleeping bags. So they had like a bedroll across their saddle. And everything that they needed, they either had to forage, hunt, bring with them, and cook in the wilderness.
Can you kind of put this into context of what was going on for women at that time?
There weren't a lot of modern conveniences, especially in a place like La Grande. So women were running households. They were caring for children. They were caring for elders. And they were doing all this housework by hand in a rural environment. Boy, can you imagine how much work that would have been to do everything by hand?
No, I cannot.
So to carve out, up to 2 weeks of time to step away from those kinds of household responsibilities really made me stop and consider my own life and think about the sacrifice that it involved for their family as well. And I think that their partners and their family knew how important it was for these women to step away from all those responsibilities and really just get back to nature with each other.
Jean's granddaughters inherited the Hen Party archives. And one amazing part of that is the Log of the Ladies. This is a running journal the Hen Party kept over the years.
Okay, so it says, dedicated to the charter members of Royal Mountaineers, initiates of moist, misty mornings, sun-drenched days, silent nights, and green growing things.
I love that.
I love that.
The women wrote, often in poetic form, about the landscape.
Where you ride atop O mountains and can see for miles around, when your eyes meet naught but wildness and the silence seems like sound, I tell you, there's some riding that would make a faint heart quail when you drop to Swamp Lake's basin down a perpendicular trail.
They wrote about the stars in the night sky.
One by one at first, then literally millions, shone forth in crystalline splendor. Darkness, silence, night, peace, rest.
Or they would tell funny stories, recount their conversations. An essential driving force of the Hen Party did not actually go on any horse-packing trips with the group herself. Jean's best friend was a woman named Grace Carter McKinnon. They were born a few months apart in the Grand Ronde Valley, and they were inseparable.
They were really close childhood friends, always played together, rode horses together, just lifelong friends.
As they grew older, their friendship shone through in their letters to one another, which remain in the family. Jessica LeCaff, the sister's cousin, is also a Hen Party descendant and the unofficial family historian.
They were always kind of conniving to do stuff that wasn't real respectable. They basically told their husbands they were going to go horsepacking in the mountains and they didn't need the men. They were really pushing their limits.
They dreamt of organizing something like the Hen Party together. But in 1926, Grace died suddenly of scarlet fever. Making good on a promise the two made to one another, Jean became a surrogate mom to Grace's children, including Melissa, Sharon, and Sally's mom. That's why the sisters call Jean their grandmother. That same year, Jean's young son also died in a horsing accident. Soon afterwards, she started leading the Hen Party trips while she was grieving for them both. Out in the natural world, surrounded by the Eagle Cap wilderness, she found ways to process those losses and perhaps begin to heal.
I think Jean wrapped herself in that feeling of comfort through being in nature and with her friends. And I think that she understood that women around her would benefit as well.
I've relied on nature to navigate grief before. Perhaps you have too. There's a sort of inherent spirituality to it, as if you can let the everyday world just fall away and simply be in your memories and in connection with something beyond yourself, whatever that may mean to you.
Besides religion, nature was the most important thing in Jean Birnie's life. And I think that the two were probably very closely combined to her. She would actually pray by climbing a tree because it took her closer to God. She would do that in the Wallowas, and it would be her quiet time. You know, she would talk to Grace and probably her son and the people she lost.
Jean wrote about the healing power that nature provides in times of sadness.
She says, I am not one of the folks who think that youth is the one period of happiness in one's life. How little they know what sorrows will be theirs when they grow up. But I hold that even tragedies can be whittled down to an endurable size if you can take them to the out of doors.
In the out of doors, Jean and her fellow travelers found comfort, connection, and so much more. That power still holds today. Coming up after a short break, Hen Party descendants follow the footsteps, or horse steps, of the Hen Party. Thanks for listening to The Evergreen, our podcast from OPB about the place you call home. If you dig what you hear, subscribe to us on your favorite podcast app, and we will brighten your Monday morning a little bit with something new and exciting to listen to each week. You can also follow OPB on Instagram at OPB Photo, or follow me directly at Jen Chavez OPB. That's Jen with 2 N's, and I will keep you posted on what Team Evergreen is up to. And remember, this episode about the Hen Party and all the great OPB reporting and storytelling you hear on this show is made possible by the support of many thousands of OPB members. Y'all truly put the public in public media. Support our journalism by becoming an OPB sustaining member today at opb.org/pod. And now, back to the show. So, Jewel, what motivated Jean's granddaughters, Melissa, Sharon, and Sally, to recreate a Hen Party expedition all these years later?
They had all been to the Wallowas before. They had gone when they were children and young adults, but I don't think they'd all three gone together. And I suspect that having inherited the Hen Party archives and starting to go through that, seeing the pictures and reading the letters and even the menus of what they would cook and the songs they would sing around the campfire, I think it sparked their imaginations.
The Hen Party has always been a part of our family story. I think I have a longing for that experience that the Hen Party had, and I can imagine what it's like, and so we really want our children involved in it too.
Yeah. So for this trip in 2023, the Hen Party descendants benefited from modern conveniences like professional outfitters, and that certainly puts into perspective how rugged a trip like this was for the original Hen Party. And of course, you and the Oregon Field Guide team were along for the ride too, with all of your camera equipment in tow as well. What was it like for you and like your team navigating the rough terrain along with these women?
Well, with gear, It was a little cumbersome, but the outfitters were amazing, and they got all our gear in there. And then my two collaborators, Dan Evans and Brandon Swanson, who are the camera people on this shoot, just really had great communication with one another. So they covered almost everything that happened. As we talked about earlier, the rainstorm, when we came up the slope, it's, 7.5, maybe 8 miles in on horseback, and we all got cold. I think we were slightly hypothermic, and also the horses were kind of, it was slick, and they were kind of scrambling up these granite slopes, and there's, a very narrow trail with a steep drop-off. So definitely that very first day, I was kind of like, oh no, what have I gotten us into? And the camera people and I had talked about, what shots we needed to cover that initial trip into the wilderness to get to our base camp. And all those plans just had to go out the window because it was a little bit unsafe. So we kind of had to improvise, and a lot of what we do on Field Guide ends up being that way. We just kind of do the best we can.
I think you all did a wonderful job, but I can imagine it being difficult. So one reason this story resonated with me is that I feel like I inherited my appreciation of the outdoors in large part from my mom. And just a quick aside to say, the day that we are recording this conversation right now is actually my mom's birthday, so happy birthday, Mom. But anyway, my mom has often talked about being inspired by the adventurousness of her aunt, who coincidentally was also named Jean, especially later in her life. This woman solo camped in Alaska, trekked in the Himalayas, and was part of a women's hiking group into her late 70s. I say all this because I see this multi-generational thread in my family that is now part of who I am. So I'm wondering, how did this idea, this passing of love for nature through generations, show up in this story?
I think it goes back to Jean and her husband George, as well as Grace and her husband Raymond. Before Grace and Raymond were married, they would go horsepacking in the Wallowas with Jean and George. And so these women really got a taste for going out into the wilderness. And I think it became so much a part of their way of living and what really inspired and made their life juicy for them that they couldn't help but pass that along to their children. And so the three sisters we've been talking about, Jean's granddaughters, really inherited that.
Just being in the mountains and experiencing the mountains with Jean, I realize now in, my later years, how much it became part of my DNA, is what I like to say. Being with her in the mountains has stayed with me all my life.
I love how the women you followed partook in Hen Party traditions. They followed old maps. They read from the Log of the Ladies. They prepared the same foods the Hen Party would make. And they sang songs at camp, like this one. This was sung by Melissa.
Under the moon, under the stars, under fir and pine, she lays down her head on hallowed ground and smiles in the quiet night.
Yeah, it's something I'll never forget. And it was, Jen, it was random. We were just sitting in a tent and it was raining and we happened to be rolling and Melissa started playing the song and I was very moved by it. Everybody was silent. Everybody was just drinking in this beautiful song, which Melissa had composed specially for this trip.
Another thing I love about your documentary is how much it provides space for just meditation on nature. Long shots of the scenery, or a shooting star in the night sky, or of the horses galloping by in the morning. And you also capture moments of the travelers silently being in nature, just kind of soaking it in.
Just wanted a chance to spend some quiet time and feel just the gratitude.
Did you experience that too, that quietness?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, obviously, Dan, Brandon, and I were working at the time, but we had to have, those moments where we would just wander away and sit and look at the wildflowers or listen to the creek tumble by. And I stole every moment I could to see if I could, experience what they experienced, just the quiet and the seclusion and the magnificence of nature.
One of the peaks, literally, of the trip for Jean's granddaughters was hiking up Eagle Cap. At more than 9,500 feet, it's one of the Wallowa's highest peaks.
It definitely is one of the things that I have talked about wanting to do before I die.
This is a very tough hike for anyone, regardless of age. But one by one, they made it. Okay, so I definitely did cry watching this scene in your documentary. What power did this accomplishment hold for Jean's granddaughters?
I think it was a big deal for them. None of them had ever summited Eagle Cap before. And so, these are women in their 70s and 80s now, and this might be the last chance they have to do that, and especially together. And I think it was really important for them to see in person what the Hen Party participants had seen themselves.
I could always imagine it, looking at the photographs. Oh my gosh, imagine that, being able to look at, and here it is in real life. I don't have to imagine this anymore,
What do you think the outdoors and nature provide to women? How they connect with it, how it allows them to connect with one another?
I think the way women are socialized is we're constantly scanning around to see who needs what, how to make the situation flow, how to make sure everybody's needs are met. So I think for these women to kind of step away from that role and just be in their own company is really therapeutic. I mean, it's really, you might not be conscious of it, but it's something that I notice when I get away into the wilderness with my girlfriends, is I just let go of a lot of that tension and that scanning. In fact, I have my own women's hiking group, and we have 3 rules: no men, no children, and no pets. And it's not because we don't love those things. We do.
Of course not, yeah.
But we just want to, I think it helps us to step away from taking care of other people. And that's just, it's incredibly nourishing.
Jean Birnie died in 1974 at the age of 88. Gerda Brownton, one of the original Hen Party horsewomen, read a passage from an article written about her when she died.
Jean, who loved the howling of coyotes and the singing of birds equally, who preferred chopping wood to embroidery, wood cook stoves to gas or electric ones, the simple life over anything complex, was buried Monday in a simple pine box. But her spirit will remain, always singing in the ponderosas, sparkling in the mountain streams, smiling in a wildflower, dancing in the blue sky.
Jewel, thank you so much for sharing the story of the Hen Party with us today. It's been a really lovely conversation.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I will remember this story the rest of my life.
Jewel Gilfillan is a producer for OPB's Oregon Field Guide. You can watch her documentary about the horsewomen of the Hen Party and the Hen Party descendants trip through the Wallowas at opb.org/OFG. We'll drop the link in our show notes as well. Thank you so much for listening to The Evergreen, a podcast from OPB. Join us next week as we continue our At Work With series, where we ask Pacific Northwesterners with interesting jobs your questions about what it's like to do what they do. This time, we'll hear from a volunteer advocate in foster care court, a private investigator, and a burlesque performer. This episode was produced by yours truly. Our technical director is Stephen Cray. He also engineered the episode. The OPB podcast team also includes Mia Estrada, Julie Sabatier, and Sage Van Wing. Joel Gilfillan, Brandon Swanson, and Dan Evans did the interviews you heard with Hen Party descendants. The 2004 interview with original Hen Party member Gerda Brownton comes from the Eastern Oregon University Library Archives. The song you heard at the horsepacking camp was performed by Melissa Over. Other music in this episode is from Audio Network. If you have a question for us, by the way, please reach out. You can email us at theevergreen@opb.org. I'm Jen Chavez. Happy trails to you until we meet again.